So what if I told you that the most important part of a conversation, or like the most emotionally devastating moment of a Beethoven symphony, and even the very fabric of molecular physics all share the exact same secret?
That is a massive claim to start with.
I know, but stick with me. What if that secret isn't the action or the sound or the physical matter at all? What if it's the absolute empty silence in between?
Right.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are really thrilled you're joining us. If you are listening to this right now, maybe on your commute or doing the dishes, you're probably filtering out 1,000 different pieces of background information just to focus on the sound of my voice.
Which is completely natural.
Exactly. You're looking for the signal, the pulse. But today we're going to ask you to do the exact opposite.
And it is a profound shift in perspective, that is for sure. Because, from a purely biological standpoint, human beings are entirely wired to look for the signal against the background noise.
Yeah.
It's how we navigate, it's how we measure reality, and frankly, it's how we survive. But the material we are diving into today challenges that deeply ingrained instinct.
It really does. Our mission today is to unpack this single, fiercely provocative essay titled What the Pause Knows.
Yes.
And we're going to explore this philosophical and scientific landscape that just asks us to completely invert our habit of looking at the world. This essay, it takes a recent, incredibly dense physics experiment and uses it to question the very nature of perception, reality, and how we extract meaning from the world around us.
Which is quite the leap.
It is. But it argues that there is a beautiful recurring shape, like a pattern, that echoes across the entire universe from the smallest molecules all the way up to the human mind.
And here is where I need to establish my baseline for our discussion today, because
I knew this was coming.
well, the poetry of this essay is undeniable, right? It's beautifully constructed and it really makes you think. But, as a physicist, I have to explicitly state up front that I view the author's foundational framing as, well, deeply problematic.
Okay, problematic how?
What we have here is an essay that is essentially overreading a perfectly routine experimental delay parameter. And then it's dressing it up in this sweeping metaphysical significance that just isn't there in the data.
See, I hear you on the literal mechanics of it, but doesn't it feel like science is occasionally too quick to dismiss the space between as just a dead variable?
Not at all.
Like if you only look at the ink on a page, you completely miss the words. You miss the spacing that makes the text readable in the first place. My question is, are we just staring at the ink today?
No, we certainly aren't ignoring the page.
Because if we ignore the architecture of the empty space, we might be missing the whole story.
But science requires us to be incredibly precise about what the ink is and what the paper is. We have to separate the physical mechanism from the poetic metaphor.
Sure, but...
Because if we blur those lines, we aren't really doing science anymore. We are just writing literature.
But what if the literature is pointing to a structural truth about the science? That's the journey we're going on today. We're going to start in a high-tech physics lab, explore the mechanics of music and the human brain, and then end up in the silence of contemplative meditation.
There's a lot of ground to cover.
It is, and yes, it sounds like we will be fiercely debating every single step of the way whether these connections are profound, universal truths, or, as my skeptical colleague here suggests, just poetic illusions.
I wouldn't call them illusions, just separate domains.
Well, let's just jump right into the deep end. The laboratory. The essay places us in a space where time is measured in a unit that is frankly insulting to the human brain's capacity to comprehend. The attosecond, attosecond.
Yes, an attosecond, is 1 quintillionth of a second.
Which is, what does that even mean?
It's 10 to the power of minus 18. Let's try to actually visualize that, because you're right, our brains aren't really built for it.
Yeah, please.
An attosecond, is to 1 single second. What 1 second is to roughly 31.7 billion years.
Oh, wow. Wait, really?
Yes.
Which is more than twice the age of the entire universe.
Exactly. It is unimaginably brief. And the reason this time scale actually matters is because it's the time scale on which electrons move.
Right.
Like when a chemical bond breaks or when light interacts with matter, the electrons are shifting and changing their energy states in attoseconds. And until very recently, this was completely invisible to us. It was just a blur.
Just a total blur. And to capture that blur, physicists had to invent an entirely new kind of camera. The essay describes an experiment where researchers fired pairs of these impossibly brief light pulses at hydrogen molecules, and they watched the quantum entanglement inside reorganize itself.
Yes, molecular hydrogen.
But before we get to the philosophy, just mechanically, how do you even fire a light pulse that fast?
It's a really brilliant piece of engineering called high harmonic generation. Essentially, you take an incredibly powerful infrared laser and you fire it into a gas.
Like what kind of gas?
Often a noble gas like argon. So the electric field of that laser is so ridiculously strong that it actually rips an electron away from the gas atom.
Just tears it right off.
Right. But the laser's field is oscillating, switching directions constantly. So a fraction of a cycle later, the field slams that exact same electron back into the atom it just left.
Like stretching a rubber band and just letting it snap back.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And when that electron crashes back into its parent atom, it releases all that kinetic energy as a burst of extreme ultraviolet light.
Wow.
And that burst lasts only a few attoseconds, attosecond. So you filter out the original infrared laser, and you're left with this ultra-fast, ultra-short pulse.
Okay, so we have our strobe light, we have our attosecond, attosecond flashes. Now let's look at the actual experiment the essay anchors itself to. They are aiming these pulses at a molecular hydrogen system, right? Just 2 protons, 2 electrons, the simplest molecule there is.
Right. And they are looking at quantum entanglement and electronic coherence.
Okay. What does that mean in English?
In simple terms, they want to see how the state of one electron is inextricably linked to the state of the other, and how the overall wave function of the molecule evolves over this unimaginably short time frame.
And here's where the essay drops its first massive conceptual bomb. I'm going to read the pivotal lines directly from the text.
Go ahead.
The author writes, "Then they changed the result, not by changing the pulses, by changing the silence between them. The interval was the instrument."
And that right there is where the metaphorical leap begins, and where my scientific alarm bells start ringing really loudly.
But just think about what they are suggesting. They tuned the gap. Their releases of energy, the actual laser pulses hitting the molecule, those were, quote, almost beside the point.
Which is just not true.
But the essay argues that the shaping of the system's knowledge of itself, how its parts were bound together, where its coherence lived, that shifted in answer to the dark between the flashes.
Okay, if we connect this back to the literal mechanics of experimental physics, what the author's describing here, with a massive dose of dramatic flair, by the way, is just standard pump probe spectroscopy.
You call it standard, but they use nothingness to change reality.
They didn't use nothingness, they used time. Let's look at the source note at the very end of the text.
Okay.
It explicitly states, attosecond, pump probe research demonstrating that the delay between paired ultra-short pulses controls quantum entanglement and electronic coherence in molecular hydrogen.
Right.
The operative word there is delay.
Right, the interval, the silence between the beats.
It is an experimental variable. Let me break down how pump probe actually works. Think of it like taking stop-motion photography of a bullet passing through an apple.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You need a flash of light to illuminate the bullet so the camera can catch it without motion blur. But you do 2 flashes if you want to measure a change over time.
Makes sense.
The first flash, the pump, hits the system and initiates a reaction. It basically starts the clock. The system begins to evolve.
So the hydrogen molecule gets excited.
Exactly. Then you fire a second flash, the probe, which takes a snapshot of what the system is doing at that exact moment. By changing the time delay between the pump and the probe, you get snapshots of the molecule at different stages of its evolution.
And you just put them together.
You stitch those together, and you have a movie of quantum dynamics. The interval between the pulses is literally just the measurement of time on a dial. It allows you to choose when you look. It is not some mystical, active instrument of darkness that is doing the shaping.
But wait, if the entanglement, like the actual physical reality of how those particles are bound together, is entirely different depending on whether the gap is 100 attoseconds, attosecond, or 200 attoseconds, attosecond, then the gap is dictating the reality you find.
No, the evolution of the system dictates the reality.
You're saying it's just a dial, a waiting room. But by turning that dial, by changing the amount of nothing between the somethings, the system reorganized itself. They didn't change the laser intensity. They didn't change the hydrogen target. They changed the empty space in time.
But time is not empty space or nothing. Time is a fundamental dimension of the physical universe. Changing the time delay simply allows the quantum evolution of the system to proceed further along its natural continuous path before you hit it with the probe.
I see what you're saying.
But, of course, the state changes. If I drop a tennis ball off a roof and you take a picture of it 1 second later, it is at position A. If you take a picture 2 seconds later, it is at position B, much closer to the ground. You didn't change the result by manipulating the silence between dropping it and photographing it. You just waited longer to look. Gravity did the work, not the silence.
That's a really great analogy, but the text is arguing that at the quantum level, it's not just a ball falling through space. The delay is inherently shaping the coherence. What the system knew about itself shifted in answer.
Which is poetic anthropomorphism.
But the essay says that reducing this to a simple parameter misses the profound philosophical shift here. The interval wasn't just a passive waiting room. It was the active ingredient in the recipe of what the universe became.
The interval acts as the experimental variable. That is the literal peer-reviewed science. The physicists are controlling their observation of the entanglement by dictating the timing of the pulses. The pulses are doing the controlling.
The pulses just mark the boundaries.
The laser is the instrument. The interval is just the spacing of the instrument's action. The quantum wave function of that hydrogen molecule is evolving continuously, whether the laser is on or off.
I disagree completely with that way of looking at it, and so does the author. The interval was the instrument. That is a definitive paradigm-shifting statement. Look at it this way. If you were building a house, you put up walls. But the walls aren't the point of the house.
They hold the roof up.
But the empty space between the walls is what makes it a room. The walls are just the boundary condition. You're giving all the credit to the drywall and ignoring the void where the actual living happens.
But without the walls, you just have an infinite, undefined expanse. You don't have a room. The pulses define the interval. Without the attosecond, attosecond flashes, there is no delay to measure. There is no beginning and no end.
But the walls don't determine the shape of the life lived inside them. The essay is pointing out that what happens in the dark, unmeasured space between the pulses is where the true reorganization of reality occurs. The pulses are just the punctuation marks. The meaning of the sentence is the space between them.
This is exactly what I mean by overreading a routine procedure. You are taking a highly specific mathematical technique used to measure electron dynamics and turning it into a metaphysical statement about the power of the void.
Isn't that such a bad thing?
It is a beautiful sentiment, but it is not physics.
I think it's a statement about how our obsession with physics, like with the measurable pulse, blinds us to the context that makes the measurement mean anything at all, which actually brings us perfectly to the psychology of this.
Okay, let's look at the psychology.
If this gap is fundamentally rewriting reality at the quantum level, it begs the question, how much of our own macroscopic reality are we missing because our brains are simply ignoring the gaps? The author writes, "We are pulse readers. We always have been."
Yes, the essay makes a very sharp pivot here from quantum mechanics into human cognition and perception. And on this point, the psychology, I actually find the author's argument much more compelling.
Because it's universally true. We attend to the event, the firing, the note struck, the thing that actually happens. If you think about your daily life, you are constantly just waiting for the next pulse. The alarm clock going off, the traffic light turning green, the vibration of your phone in your pocket. We treat the gap between these events as dead space.
Mere waiting. The text calls it the nothing we sit through until the next something arrive. It is the classic dichotomy of foreground and background, signal and silence.
Yeah, the pulse is what matters. The pause is what we endure. That line is brilliant because it highlights an addiction. We are addicted to the signal, but the essay asks us to turn the picture inside out, just like the hydrogen molecule insisted.
Metaphorically insisted.
What if the gap is not the absence between meanings, but the place where meaning is actually manufactured?
Biologically, there is a very good reason we are pulse readers. We are pattern recognition machines, and our nervous systems are heavily optimized to lock on to high-energy events.
To keep us alive.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, isn't interested in the peaceful, unchanging background of the forest. It is interested in the sudden snap of a twig, a sudden loud noise, a bright flash of light, a sudden movement. Evolutionarily, we are wired to notice the pulse, because the pulse is the predator that might eat us, or the prey we need to eat.
Right. Survival demands that we focus on the tiger jumping out of the bushes. But by surviving, by focusing only on the sudden action, we've blinded ourselves to the complex ecosystem that produced the tiger in the first place. We ignore the background.
Filter it out, yes.
And this leads to the most radical question of the entire piece. What if reality arrives stroboscopically, in flashes, in samples, and the quiet intervals between the samples are doing the real work on what becomes known?
And here is where I have to draw a hard line again, because the author is conflating human perceptual limits with fundamental objective physics.
Are they conflating it, or are they suggesting a fractal universe where the macro mirrors the micro?
Let's examine the word stroboscopically. The text suggests that our awareness, our actual perception of the world, might not be a continuous, unbroken flow, but a series of discrete frames, sampled moments, like a strobe light flashing on and off.
Stitched together into the illusion of flow, like a film strip.
Exactly like a film strip.
Now, when you watch a movie, you feel like you are watching continuous motion. But mechanically, you are just watching 24 static, still pictures every second. And between every single one of those pictures is a tiny gap of absolute blackness.
Yes.
Your brain ignores the blackness and creates the motion. The gap is what allows the illusion of continuity to exist.
Precisely. It is a biological illusion. In visual neuroscience, this relates to concepts like the critical flicker fusion rate or the phi phenomena. Our brains hold on to an image for a fraction of a second after it disappears, which bridges the gap between static frames.
Right.
It is an incredibly efficient way for the brain to process a massive amount of visual data without being overwhelmed. But, and this is the massive but, the essay is trying to link this biological neurological limitation to the physical spacing of an attosecond pump probe laser.
It
is taking a quirk of human visual processing and using it to suggest that physical reality itself operates the same way.
So you're saying the stroboscopic reality is entirely in our heads?
I am saying that the universe does not blink just because our eyes do. The source note makes this clear. The source, the laser, the physical hydrogen, is real. But this stroboscopic speculation about reality itself is precisely that speculation. It is an artistic interpretation of a biological limit.
But let's play with your strobe light analogy for a second.
Okay.
Imagine you are in a pitch black room with a strobe light, and there is a dancer in the center of the room. The strobe flashes. You see the dancer in one pose. Darkness. The strobe flashes again. The dancer is in an entirely new position on the other side of the room.
Right, because they move during the dark interval.
Exactly. What you see, the data you collect, isn't defined by the light. The light just catches the result, the actual movement, the choreography, the physical exertion of the dancer's body. All of the complex physics happened in the dark while the light was off.
But without the light, you have absolutely zero knowledge of the dancer at all. The pulse is required for the data to exist in your mind.
But the light didn't make the dance. The light just sampled it. The essay is saying, what if the universe is the dancer, and our perception, or even our most advanced scientific instruments, are just the strobe light?
That's a philosophical stance, not a physical one.
We keep assigning all the importance, all the credit to the flash, the pulse, the measurement. We think the laser pulse is doing the work. But the gap, the darkness, the unmeasured interval is where the entanglement actually reorganizes. The interval is where the universe dances.
That is undeniably beautiful poetry. But it remains terrible physics. The dancer is moving continuously, fluidly through space and time, whether your strobe light is on or off.
Sure.
The continuity of the physical world exists independent of our sampled, flawed perception of it. To claim that the interval is doing the real work implies that the void itself has agency. In the hydrogen experiment, the delay parameter is a measure of continuous quantum evolution over time. It is not a sequence of nothingness interspersed with reality. The quantum wave function doesn't stop existing in the attosecond gaps. It evolves continuously, according to the Schrödinger equation.
But the text literally points this out. It says, and it is not settled that we perceive the world continuously at all. Awareness may be sampled.
Awareness may be sampled. Yes, human awareness, subjective experience, not the hydrogen molecule's objective existence. You are conflating the map with the territory.
Am I?
Yes. How a human brain constructs a narrative of time is a fascinating neuroscientific question. How an electron behaves under attosecond laser pulses is a quantum mechanical question. They are governed by entirely separate domains of science.
And yet, the author points out that once you begin looking for this pattern, this profound relationship between the pulse and the pause, it is everywhere. It refuses to stay in the physics lab, which really launches us into the rhyme.
Right, the rhymes.
If this was just an isolated physics experiment, maybe you'd be right. But this architecture echoes across disciplines.
The rhymes. This is where the essay casts a very wide net to catch as many metaphors as possible to support its premise.
I really think dismissing them as metaphors is a reductive way to look at what the author is doing. Let's look at the first rhyme, music. The author writes, "The rest is not the absence of music. The rest is music."
Well, from a structural compositional standpoint, of course, a rest is a specific musical notation indicating a precise duration of silence. It is mathematically built into the time signature.
But it's so much more than just a math equation on sheet music. A phrase breathes because of where the silence falls. Think about the psychoacoustics of this. Think about Beethoven's Fifth Symphony.
Okay.
Everyone knows it. Da-da-da-dum. It is not just 4 notes. The genius of that motif is the immense, heavy, terrifying silence that follows the dum before the next phrase begins.
The fermata, the held pause.
Yes. That pause holds the entire emotional tension of the universe in it. If you remove the pause, if you just play the notes back to back immediately on a synthesizer, da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, it is not the same melody faster. It is no melody at all.
Well, mechanically, moving the rest changes the rhythm, the meter, and the relative relationships between the frequencies. Of course, it writes a different piece. This comes down to acoustics and how human aesthetic processing works. We perceive by contrast. Sound against silence is what creates rhythm.
But let's dig into the how of that. Why does that silence hold so much weight? When you hear the first 3 notes, your auditory cortex is already predicting the 4th.
Right, pattern recognition.
And when the 4th hits, your brain expects a continuation. But Beethoven gives you silence. Biologically, your brain is withholding dopamine during that pause. It is creating a biological tension and anticipation. The silence isn't dead space, it is neurologically deafening. The signal rides the silence.
It is a manipulation of expectation, yes. It is the contrast that gives the night its impact. But again, the silence doesn't compose the symphony.
The signal rides the silence. That is the key phrase. And it happens literally inside the very brain cells processing that symphony.
Which brings us to the neuroscience.
Exactly. The essay moves from the concert hall directly into the skull. In the brain, stranger still, a neuron's meaning can live not in whether it fires, but in when it fires relative to the ongoing wave.
This is a reference to a concept called phase coding in neuroscience. And I will admit, it is a highly complex and legitimate phenomenon.
Let's unpack phase coding because it is just mind-blowing. We used to think that the brain was binary. A neuron fires an electrical spike, an action potential, and that's a 1. It doesn't fire, and that's a 0. The pulse is the whole story.
That was the classic view, yes.
But phase coding says that's wrong.
It says it's incomplete. The brain has background oscillatory rhythms, brain waves, millions of neurons firing in sync, creating massive electrical waves sweeping across the cortex, theta waves, gamma waves, alpha waves.
Right.
These waves have peaks and troughs, high points of excitability and low points of inhibition.
And the essay says, the offbeat carrying what the beat cannot. If a specific neuron fires its spike right at the peak of that background wave, it might mean, look at that red car. But if that exact same neuron fires the exact same spike, but it happens in the trough of the wave, in the quiet valley, the offbeat, it means something entirely different.
It's about relative timing within a complex dynamical system. The exact millisecond the action potential arrives relative to the background rhythm determines how it is processed by the downstream neurons. It is an incredibly efficient, multidimensional way for the brain to encode information.
It's like jazz happening inside our gray matter. The background wave, the undulating silence between the massive spikes, provides the necessary context that gives the pulse its meaning. It's the exact same shape.
Yeah.
The attosecond interval tuning the quantum entanglement of the hydrogen molecule, the musical rest defining the emotional impact of the melody, the neural offbeat defining the meaning of the signal. In every single case, the gap is doing the vital work.
And right here, I must stop you, because I'm going to use the author's own words against you to prove my point.
Oh, I know exactly which paragraph you're going to bring up.
Because it is, without a doubt, the most intellectually honest paragraph in the entire essay. The author explicitly inserts a massive warning here. A disclaimer. Let me read what they actually wrote. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the place where a beautiful idea goes wrong.
I am not ignoring that passage.
Let me finish the quote. The attosecond delay and the musical rest and the neural offbeat are not the same thing. They are not one mechanism wearing 3 costumes. No hidden law unites the hydrogen molecule and the held breath before a chorus.
I agree with that.
Then you have to agree with their ultimate conclusion. To claim otherwise would be to mistake a rhyme for a proof. And that is exactly what I have been arguing since we started this deep dive. You, and frankly the overall tone of the essay itself, despite this brief disclaimer, are mistaking poetic rhymes for scientific proofs. You're seeing a pattern, the necessity of timing, or the contrast of space, and assuming it represents a unified, mystical law of the universe.
It's not mystical.
There is no hidden law uniting them, the author admits it. The physics of an attosecond laser has literally nothing mathematically or mechanistically in common with phase coding in a hippocampus.
I am absolutely not ignoring the warning, but I am refusing to let that warning kill the wonder of the observation. Because look at the very next sentence the author writes. After saying it's not a mathematical proof, they write, what they share is a shape.
A shape is an abstraction. It is a human cognitive overlay. We look at clouds and see faces. We look at three disparate phenomena and see a shape.
And a shape, recurring across scales that have no business speaking to each other, is worth holding up to the light. Why are you so resistant to examining the shape?
I am not resistant to it. I am categorizing it correctly. It belongs in the realm of art, metaphor, and philosophy, not in a rigorous discussion of physics or neuroscience.
But the author is telling us how to look at it. Not as a theory to be defended, but as a question to be felt. You keep asking for a mathematical proof, for a rigorous equation that inextricably links a Beethoven rest to an attosecond laser pulse. And the author is explicitly saying, put down the calculator for a minute, look at the architecture.
If I put down the calculator in a quantum physics lab, I don't discover profound structural truths about reality. I fail the experiment, or worse. Science works because we demand proof. We demand mechanism. A question to be felt does not explain how the universe operates.
But it might explain how we understand our place in it. Why does the same figure keep appearing? That is the foundational question the essay asks. Why, when we look closely at how anything becomes known, do we keep finding the gap doing work we had assigned to the pulse?
Because of contrast.
Even if it's just a quirk of human cognition, even if it's just how biology processes information, isn't it staggering that our brains are structured to find deep meaning in the void, just as an experimenter finds a shifting physical reality in the unmeasured delay?
It is an interesting evolutionary quirk that we use contrast to extract information. I will concede that point. We use the silence to define the boundaries of the sound. We use the background to define the foreground. But the background doesn't do the acting.
Are you sure?
Yes. The silence doesn't compose the music. The composer does. The laser does. The neuron does. The pulse acts. The gap merely contextualizes.
Merely contextualizes. You say that as if context isn't everything. A word means absolutely nothing without the context of the sentence, and the sentence relies fundamentally on the blank spaces between the words. You literally cannot read without the gaps.
But you also cannot read a page of blank spaces. There has to be a signal.
Exactly. They are partners. They are an ecosystem. But the essay's point is that we've spent centuries giving all the awards, all the funding, and all our attention to the ink.
Because the ink is measurable.
We've been entirely one-sided in our appreciation of reality. We are utterly obsessed with the pulse. And this realization brings us to the final and perhaps most profound destination of this deep dive. The essay leaves the laboratory, the symphony, and the neuroscience lab behind completely and enters the contemplative gap.
Yes, introspection as a method of inquiry.
The contemplatives got here first, of course, by a different road. The essay takes us into the minds of meditators, people from various traditions who have spent years, sometimes decades, just sitting quietly and rigorously watching their own consciousness unfold.
And from a psychological standpoint, what they observe aligns with what William James talked about regarding the stream of consciousness.
Right. What do they find? If you sit quietly for long enough, you notice that thoughts arrive in pulses too. A rising, holding, ceasing. A memory of an embarrassing moment pops up. It spikes your heart rate. It holds. And then it fades.
Just discrete mental events.
A worry about a meeting tomorrow spikes. It holds. It fades.
The subjective experience of a continuous stream of thought is actually quite fragmented upon close, rigorous introspection.
But it's what happens between the thoughts that is the crux of the entire essay, and that the space between them is not empty. It was never empty.
From a strict neurobiological standpoint, the brain is never empty. Even in the deepest states of meditation, there is immense baseline activity. We mentioned the default mode network earlier, which handles mind-wandering and self-referential thought.
Right.
That might quiet down during meditation, but the brain is constantly metabolizing, monitoring the body, maintaining homeostasis. The neurons are always humming.
But the essay isn't talking about metabolism. It's talking about subjective experience. From the perspective of awareness, what the contemplatives report is that the gap between two thoughts is not a lapse in consciousness. It's not like you fall asleep for a microsecond and wake up when the next thought arrives. The author writes, "It may be the clearest awareness there is."
The experience of pure, objectless consciousness. Awareness without an object to be aware of.
The place where you are most plainly here, before the next something organizes the silence into meaning.
And this, right here, this exact point is the boiling point for me. This is where the essay's metaphorical reach finally breaks its own structural integrity.
How does it break? It's the ultimate culmination of the shape we've been tracking.
Because it is fundamentally conflating an extreme, subjective, psychological state with the objective physical measurement of the universe. Linking the psychological phenomenon of deep meditation to the quantum coherence of molecular hydrogen is the ultimate overreach.
I don't think it's overreach, it's just...
Let me be as clear as I possibly can. A physicist measuring an attosecond, attosecond delay, is not meditating. They are not experiencing pure, objectless awareness. They are calibrating a highly complex piece of machinery.
Obviously.
They are reading empirical data off a screen. To suggest that the silence between their laser pulses possesses some kind of intrinsic knowledge or awareness akin to a Zen monk's mind is, frankly, absurd.
I think you are being incredibly reductionist, and you are deliberately refusing to look at the shape the author is drawing. No one is saying the hydrogen molecule is sitting cross-legged on a cushion, chanting a mantra.
The title of the essay is literally what the pause knows. It is personifying a lack of an event. It is explicitly assigning agency and cognition to an empty interval of time.
It is a poetic provocation. It is a rhetorical device asking us to reconsider our deepest bias. Listen to how the author frames it. We spend our lives reading the pulses. We are trained from birth to attend to the events, to mistake the releases of energy for the whole of what is happening.
Which, again, keeps us alive.
The author is saying that this bias blinds us. In physics, we ignore the active role of the delay. In music, we ignore the tension of the rest. In our own minds, we ignore the clarity of the space between thoughts. We ignore the very space where the shaping happens.
But the shaping happens through forces. Through electromagnetism, gravity, strong and weak nuclear forces.
Yeah.
In music, it happens through acoustic waves compressing air. In the brain, it happens through synaptic transmission and chemical gradients.
And time.
Forces are pulses. Action requires energy. The gap is the canvas. The pulse is the paint. The canvas provides the space, but the canvas doesn't paint the picture.
But the texture and size of the canvas dictates what kind of picture can be painted, and the essay pushes this further. And all the while, the gaps, the rests, the offbeats, the dark between the flashes, the pause before the word, have been shaping what we are able to know.
Think about language.
Okay, language.
If you don't have the pause before you speak, you just produce a continuous, unintelligible drone of noise. The pause structures the intelligence. It makes the signal legible. The author provides us with a reality check right at the very end. Look at the final italicized note again. This is the anchor. Signals are possibilities with consequences. The source is real. The speculation is named. The rest belongs to the reader.
The rest belongs to the reader.
Yes. The science is the source. The attosecond pulse is real. The measurement of the hydrogen molecule is real. The speculation, the idea of a stroboscopic reality or an aware silence that belongs to the reader's imagination. The author is giving us permission to dream, but they are clearly fundamentally separating the dream from the empirical data.
I completely agree with that sentence, but look at how differently we interpret the rest belongs to the reader. You think that means the rest is just make-believe, leave it out of the lab?
Because it is.
I think it means that the true responsibility of understanding the universe falls on how we read it.
Exactly. The rest belongs to the reader. And as readers of reality, shouldn't we finally start paying attention to the rest? To the intervals? To the silences that give the pulses their power?
Paying attention to the intervals is fine. It is necessary for good science and good art. Pretending the intervals are actively generating the physical laws of the universe is not. Perhaps the work was always there. In the silence we were too busy to attend to. Perhaps the pause knew something all along. That is how the essay concludes. It leaves us lingering in that very silence, unresolved.
It ends on a rhetorical question designed to provoke awe. And as a piece of writing, it works beautifully. But as a model for reality, it remains an unproven, speculative rhyme. the pulse is still required. You cannot measure an attosecond, without the flash.
And you cannot define a flash without the dark. It seems we're going to remain locked in this orbit today. You proudly anchored to the literal physics, the measurable pulse, to the mechanics of the event.
Proudly anchored, yes. Without the pulse, there is no signal to decipher.
And me, utterly captivated by the profound shape of the interval, the hidden architecture of the empty spaces that allow the universe to breathe. We aren't going to resolve this tension today, and honestly, I think the author of the essay would prefer it exactly that way.
I imagine so.
The friction between the signal and the silence, between the science and the poetry, is where the intellectual energy really lives.
On that point, at least, we might find a sliver of agreement. The friction is generative. It forces us to clarify our terms.
So we turn this over to you, listening to us debate this. What do you think? As you navigate your day, walking through your stroboscopic reality of emails, alarms, conversations, and traffic lights, are we just poetic apes finding faces in the clouds, trying to find meaning in empty delays?
Yeah.
Or is the fundamental architecture of reality truly built out of the empty spaces between the flashes?
It is a question worth considering the next time you find yourself simply waiting in the dark for something to happen.
And we want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over. We've talked about perception as a strobe light. If the essay is right, if our reality is indeed stitched together from discrete frames, from sampled pulses of awareness.
A purely speculative if, I must remind everyone.
If that is true, and the gap is where the editing happens, where the meaning is organized and the tension is built before the next flash arrives, then who or what is doing the editing in the dark while we aren't looking?
Now, that is a truly terrifying thought.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into what the pause knows. Keep looking at the ink, but don't forget to read the spaces in between. We'll see you next time.